There was a moment in American history when something invisible snapped. No fireworks, no speeches, no headlines warning the public, just a quiet announcement on television in August of 1971. President Richard Nixon looked into the camera and told the nation that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporary. That word should have set off alarms across the entire planet, because in that moment, the final tether between labor and reality was cut. Before that day, money represented something tangible, gold, a fixed measure of value. But after that moment, money became something else entirely, a promise, a symbol, a number typed into existence by institutions that answer to no voters. And from that moment forward, the value of your work stopped being anchored to anything real. It became adjustable, inflatable, erodable. And slowly, almost invisibly, the middle class began to dissolve. Your grandfather could raise a family of four on a single salary from a factory job. He could buy a home, own land, retire with dignity. But today, two college degrees, two full-time incomes, mountains of debt, and one medical emergency away from financial collapse. The experts call this inflation. But inflation is just the polite word for something much darker, a slow-motion transfer of wealth, a quiet enclosure, not of land, but of the human spirit itself. Tonight, we investigate the economic system that is turning citizens into tenants, workers into debtors, and savings accounts into unsecured loans to a financial empire that cannot survive without your submission. This is the enclosure of the human spirit. The official narrative. If you listen to economists on television, the explanation seems simple. The economy is just evolving. Technology has changed the way we work. Globalization has changed the way we trade. And younger generations, they say, simply prefer flexibility. They prefer renting. They prefer subscription services. They prefer access instead of ownership. Why own a car when you can summon a ride? Why own music when you can stream it? Why own tools when you can borrow them? Why own a house when renting gives you freedom? According to the official narrative, modern life is becoming lighter, more efficient, and more convenient. Ownership is outdated. Possession is unnecessary. The future is access. But there's just one problem with that story. Every time ownership disappears, power moves upward. And every time power moves upward, freedom moves downward. The moment everything changed. To understand what happened, we need to return to that moment in 1971. The United States quietly moved into an entirely new economic reality. For the first time in history, the global reserve currency was no longer backed by any physical asset. The dollar became a pure fiat currency. That means its value depends entirely on government decree and market confidence. But something else happened as well. Once money was no longer tied to gold, there was no longer any natural limit on how much of it could be created. Central banks gained the ability to expand the money supply almost indefinitely. And when new money enters the system, it doesn't arrive evenly. It enters through the financial sector first. Banks, Wall Street, asset markets. By the time it trickles down to workers, prices have already risen. This process has a name, the Cantillon effect. And it explains why those closest to money creation grow richer, while those paid in wages fall behind. The productivity mystery. There is a graph that economists rarely show on television. From 1948 to 1973, worker productivity and worker wages grew together. When workers produced more, they earned more. But after 1973, something strange happened. Productivity continued to rise. Workers kept producing more goods, more services, more value. But wages stopped keeping up. The line split. Productivity climbed upward. Compensation flattened. That gap represents trillions of dollars in value that never reached the workers who created it. So where did it go? It went into financial markets, corporate consolidation, asset inflation, executive compensation, and the quiet expansion of a financial class that profits not from producing things, but from controlling money itself. The new lords of the manor. In the past, the American dream centered on ownership, owning a home, owning land, owning tools, owning the fruits of your labor. But something new has begun happening in the housing market. Large financial institutions have started purchasing enormous numbers of residential homes, entire neighborhoods, thousands of houses at a time. These firms are not buying homes the way traditional investors do. They are buying housing as infrastructure, a permanent rental grid, a system where families no longer accumulate equity. They simply pay rent forever. The homeowner becomes the tenant, the landlord becomes an institution, and wealth stops circulating through communities. It flows upward into investment portfolios. The subscription economy. Look around your life and you will notice something strange. Ownership is quietly disappearing. Movies, subscription. Music, subscription. Software, subscription. Transportation, ride services. Storage, cloud rentals. Even household appliances are now being designed for leasing models. Instead of buying things, modern consumers are increasingly paying permanent access fees. And every subscription has a gatekeeper. Every gatekeeper has a switch, and every switch can be turned off. The bail-in trap. Most people believe their money is safely stored in the bank, but legally speaking, that's not exactly true. When you deposit money into a bank, the funds do not remain your property. They become a liability on the bank's balance sheet. In simple terms, you have loaned the bank your money. You are an unsecured creditor. Normally, this arrangement works fine. But after the financial crisis of 2008, governments quietly introduced something called bail-in frameworks. In a bailout, governments rescue failing banks using taxpayer money. In a bail-in, banks recapitalize themselves using depositor funds, your deposits, your savings, your retirement funds. If a systemic banking crisis occurs, those deposits can legally be converted into bank equity to stabilize the institution. Your savings become the rescue package. The historical precedent. This process has happened before. In 18th century England, something called the Enclosure Acts transformed the economy. For centuries, peasants had access to common lands, shared pastures where families could grow food and raise animals. But wealthy landowners began fencing these lands off. Through legislation, the commons became private property. Peasants lost access to their traditional livelihoods. They were forced into cities to work in factories. The enclosure of land created the industrial workforce. Today, we are witnessing something eerily similar. Except the land being enclosed is not farmland, it is the economy itself, biblical perspective. The Bible describes a different economic vision, a vision rooted in stewardship, not permanent debt, not centralized control, but family autonomy. In the book of Micah, we read, Micah 4:4, "But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid." This image represents security, ownership, stability, a household sustained by its own labor. But the modern economic system moves in the opposite direction, toward dependence, toward permanent borrowing, toward a world where fewer and fewer people possess anything at all. Proverbs 22:7 warns us plainly, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Debt is not just a financial instrument, it is a form of power. And a society drowning in debt is a society easily controlled. The coming economic order. What happens when ownership disappears completely? When housing is rented, transportation is rented, software is rented, entertainment is rented, and even money itself becomes programmable digital currency? At that point, the economy stops functioning like a market. It begins functioning like a permission system. Access depends on compliance. Participation depends on approval, and financial freedom becomes conditional, not guaranteed. Final reflection. The middle class once served as a buffer, a stabilizing force between power and poverty. Homeowners, business owners, farmers, tradesmen, independent families who possessed enough wealth to resist political pressure. But that buffer is slowly eroding, and as it disappears, society begins to resemble an older structure. A small ruling class, a large dependent class, and very little in between. The Bible calls systems like this Babylon, merchant empires built on the buying and selling of everything, even the souls of men. Revelation 18 describes a world where commerce expands until nothing remains outside the marketplace. Not land, not labor, not even humanity itself. The system wants you distracted, arguing with strangers online, chasing the next headline, worrying about problems that feel too big to solve, because a distracted population never asks the real questions. But tonight, we pulled back the curtain. The shrinking middle class, the endless debt, the subscription economy, the housing crisis. These things didn't just happen. They are symptoms of a financial system that slowly moved ownership upward, while pushing dependence downward. But history teaches us something important. Every empire that tried to control everything eventually collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The Roman Empire fell, the Soviet Union fell, and every economic system built entirely on debt eventually reaches the same moment: reality. Because numbers on a screen are not real wealth. Real wealth is land. Real wealth is skill. Real wealth is faith, family, and community. And those things can never be printed, inflated, or erased by a central bank. The Bible warned about systems like this long ago. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Debt is not just economics, it is control. And the more you understand how the system works, the harder it becomes for that system to control you. That's why channels like this exist: to question narratives, to dig into history, and to remind people that truth still matters. If you found this investigation valuable, help this message reach more people. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe to Rock Solid TV so you don't miss the next deep dive. And if you want to help support the channel, you can do so by clicking the link below and becoming a member. For more Rock Solid TV truth, check out the books available now by Rocky Smith, RSTV Sunday School for Adults. History, they don't teach in school. Bible, they don't preach in church. Rock Solid Bible knowledge. Until next time, keep seeking truth, stand firm in faith, and remember, a man who understands the system cannot be easily enslaved by it. This is Rock Solid TV, uncensored history, unfiltered truth, unshakable faith.